There are certain cars that become more than just ways to get around. The Model T made it possible for regular people to own cars for the first time. The Mini became a symbol of British creativity and style. And the Volkswagen Beetle, a car with the darkest possible beginning, has maybe the strangest story in car history by transforming from a Nazi propaganda project into a worldwide symbol of peace, love, and rebellion. Today, we're exploring what really happened to the Volkswagen Beetle, how it went from being Hitler's idea to becoming the people's car, why it became a symbol of the counterculture movement despite where it came from, how never-changing made it hugely successful and then eventually killed it, why bringing it back didn't work, and where this complicated story stands in car history. The Volkswagen Beetle didn't start from good intentions. In 1930s Germany, cars were expensive luxury items only rich people could afford. Most Germans couldn't even dream of owning one. Adolf Hitler saw this as an opportunity for propaganda and control, dressed up as helping regular people. He wanted a people's car, which is exactly what Volkswagen means in German. But this wasn't really about helping families get around. This was about looking good, about showing the world that Nazi Germany was modern, about building highways that would later be used to move troops and weapons during the war he was already planning. Hitler hired Ferdinand Porsche to design this people's car with specific goals. It needed to carry 4 people, go 62 miles per hour, get 42 miles per gallon, and cost less than 1,000 Reichsmarks, which was affordable for German workers. This matters because it was designed for the Autobahn highways Hitler was building, roads that would be used for military purposes. The car got called the KDF Wagen, which stood for Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy, pure Nazi propaganda language. The government created a program where workers paid in advance for cars they'd supposedly get later. A huge factory was built to make them. But here's the thing, no regular person ever actually got one of these cars before the war started. When World War II began, the factory immediately switched to making military vehicles. The Ka-1 Pass Vorbellwagen, the military version, was used throughout the war. By 1945, the factory had been bombed heavily and was basically destroyed. The car existed, but Nazi Germany fell before regular people ever got to buy them. When Allied forces found the factory in the ruins after the war, they had to decide what to do with it. A British officer named Ivan Hurst saw that it could be useful. The military desperately needed vehicles for their occupation forces and for rebuilding. They got the factory running again, making cars for military use and dropping the Nazi name, just calling it Volkswagen. This is important because the British seriously thought about just tearing down the whole factory and forgetting about the design. The Beetle almost disappeared completely. In the late 1940s, the factory was given back to German control. A man named Heinz Nordhoff took over in 1948 and faced a country that was completely destroyed. Germany was in ruins. The economy was wrecked, and people desperately needed affordable ways to get around to rebuild their lives. The Beetle was exactly what they could afford. It was simple, reliable, cheap to fix, and built well. It wasn't beautiful or exciting, but it worked, and that's what mattered. And it did something crucial. The Beetle proved that simple, honest car building could succeed in a world that was starting to focus more on flash and marketing. Volkswagen made a bold decision. No yearly changes, no forcing people to buy new cars because the old ones looked outdated, no big advertising campaigns about how this year's model was totally new. When they improved something, they just quietly made it better and kept building the car. They made it better while keeping it basically the same. That honesty stood out when American cars were changing dramatically every year just to force people into buying new ones. Through the 1950s, they made more and more Beetles, and the car became everywhere across Europe. The people's car was finally real, just not the way Hitler had imagined. It was affordable, reliable, got good gas mileage, and was easy to fix with basic tools. It was perfect for rebuilding Europe after the war when money was tight and people just needed transportation that worked without costing a fortune. Then Volkswagen tried something that seemed crazy. In 1949, the first Beetles showed up in America, and it looked impossible. Americans loved huge cars with tons of chrome and big engines. The Beetle was tiny, looked weird, had a weak engine, and was the complete opposite of everything Americans wanted in a car. They only sold 330 cars that first year. It looked like a total failure. Everything about it was wrong for America. It was small when Americans wanted big. It was simple when Americans wanted fancy features. It stayed the same when Americans expected cars to look different every year. But here's what's crucial. American cars were getting bigger, more complicated, and more expensive every year. The yearly changes were forcing people to buy new cars, even when their old ones worked perfectly fine. It was becoming obvious that cars were being built to wear out or look outdated on purpose. The Beetle was the exact opposite of everything Detroit car companies stood for. A small group of buyers started liking that difference. The Beetle wasn't trying to be an American car. It was proudly proudly different. Then in 1959, something revolutionary happened. An advertising agency called Doyle Dane Bernbach created the Think Small campaign for Volkswagen, and it changed advertising forever. Instead of hiding what made the Beetle different, they celebrated it with complete honesty. They admitted the Beetle was small, ugly, and simple. They turned weaknesses into strengths. It's ugly, but it gets you there. We don't change it. We just improve it. They made the fact that it never changed into the main reason to buy it. In a world where everything changed every year on purpose, staying the same became radical. Sales exploded in the early 1960s. The Beetle became the car people wanted when they rejected mainstream American culture. College students, intellectuals, people who didn't want to conform, bought them in huge numbers. Then the hippie movement adopted it as their unofficial vehicle. Peace, love, and Volkswagens became connected. The car that Hitler designed was now representing the exact opposite values. Painted in bright psychedelic colors, covered in flowers and peace signs, the Beetle went through maybe the most complete transformation in car history. And here's the telling part. The Beetle succeeded in America specifically by being un-American. While Detroit kept adding chrome and fancy styling, the Beetle stayed simple. While American cars got bigger every year, the Beetle stayed small. While Detroit changed everything annually to force sales, the Beetle stayed basically the same. That consistency, that refusal to follow American trends, became the whole reason to buy it. Being different was the strategy, and it worked amazingly well. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Beetle hit peak success. It became the best-selling import car in America by a huge margin. By 1968, Volkswagen was selling over 500,000 Beetles every year worldwide. Then in 1972 came a historic moment. The Beetle passed the Ford Model T as the best-selling car design ever, going past 15 million sold. Factories ran day and night to keep up with demand. Beetles were absolutely everywhere. The car had become a worldwide symbol of reliability, simplicity, and honest building. Then the 1973 oil crisis hit and changed everything. Suddenly getting good gas mileage went from nice to absolutely necessary. Gas prices shot up, there were shortages creating long lines at gas stations, and everyone desperately wanted fuel-efficient cars. This should have been the Beetle's moment. It got decent mileage, it was proven reliable, it was exactly what people needed. But Japanese car companies showed up at the same time with modern fuel-efficient cars that had better engineering and better reliability than even the Beetle. Honda, Toyota, and Datsun were building cars that were as economical as the Beetle, but more comfortable, more refined, and way more modern. The Beetle's age was finally showing in ways nobody could ignore. Volkswagen's whole strategy had been never change, and it worked brilliantly for over 20 years. Now that strategy was becoming a fatal problem. The Beetle still used air cooling when everyone else had switched to water cooling. It still had the engine in the back when that was considered outdated. It was still basically a 1930s design, being sold in the 1970s. What had made it special was now making it obsolete. The world had changed around the Beetle, and the Beetle hadn't changed with it. In 1977, Volkswagen stopped selling the Beetle in America and replaced it with the Rabbit, called the Golf in Europe. The Rabbit was modern with the engine in front-wheel drive, everything the Beetle wasn't. Volkswagen was trying to compete with Japanese cars using modern design. The Beetle era was over in its biggest market, but making Beetles didn't completely stop. Production kept going in Mexico, where pollution rules were simpler and allowed the old design to continue. The Beetle became famous as a Mexican taxi, earning the nickname Vocho. These were the last Beetles being made anywhere, and they kept rolling off the assembly line until July 30th, 2003. The final Beetle was celebrated and sent to a museum, ending a story that lasted over 60 years. The numbers are remarkable. Over 21 million classic Beetles were made, making it the longest production run of any car on a single design and the most successful car in history by total sales. But that success was based entirely on never changing. When the world demanded change to meet new rules and compete with better technology, the Beetle died because it couldn't change without losing everything that made it special. Then in 1998, Volkswagen tried to bring back the magic with the new Beetle. It had styling that reminded people of the original, with round shapes and cute looks. But underneath, it was a modern car based on the Golf. It looked like a Beetle and had design touches from the original, but it drove like a regular modern car. It was cute, nostalgic, and popular at first with people who remembered the original fondly, but something important was missing. The original Beetle succeeded by being honest. It was simple, cheap, reliable, and never changed. Those weren't just marketing claims, they were true. The new Beetle was a styling trick, a modern car dressed up to look like a Beetle. It wasn't particularly cheap compared to other small cars. It wasn't particularly simple. It was just nostalgic styling meant to remind people of the original. It sold based on memories rather than being actually good, on what people remembered rather than what the original really was. Volkswagen tried again in 2011 with a second attempt that looked sportier and more aggressive. It was less cute and more grown up, still a modern car in retro clothing. Sales went down throughout its time, and Volkswagen ended production in 2019, saying this time it was permanent. The Beetle was done. Looking at the whole story, a clear pattern shows up. The original Beetle succeeded through being completely authentic. It was simple and honest, never pretending to be something it wasn't. Never changing, while American cars changed every year, was the whole strategy. That worked perfectly until the world changed so much that staying the same became a problem. Then the Beetle couldn't adapt without losing everything that made it the Beetle. It couldn't become modern without stopping being itself. The attempts to bring it back failed because they were based on nostalgia. They were selling memories of the original, feelings people had about the Beetle, but the original wasn't nostalgic when it was new. It was practical, honest, and affordable. It was real. The new ones weren't those things. They were just styling that reminded people of a better car from a different time. Nostalgia can sell some cars, but it can't replace actual substance. The truth is, the Beetle succeeded by being exactly right for specific moments in time. After World War II, Europe needed affordable, simple transportation, and the Beetle delivered perfectly. In the 1960s, America had people rejecting conformity and excess, and the Beetle represented the opposite of mainstream American values. But those moments end. What people want changes. What worked in 1960 didn't work in 1980. What worked in 1960 definitely didn't work in 2010 when people wanted modern safety, efficiency, and technology. The legacy the Beetle left is huge. It transformed from a Nazi propaganda tool to a worldwide peace symbol, which might be the most complete transformation in history. It became the most successful car design ever by sticking to its principles. It proved simple building could beat complexity. It showed that consistency could actually be a strategy rather than a weakness. It created the pattern for how foreign brands could succeed in America. It influenced everything from bringing back the Mini to the PT Cruiser to every retro-styled car that came after. What the Beetle represents goes beyond just car history. It's about simple, honest engineering beating marketing tricks. It's about the power of being consistent and authentic in a world that demands constant change. It's about how where something comes from doesn't determine what it becomes. It's proof that complete transformation is possible. It shows success can come from being different rather than following everyone else, and it might be the last time in car history that refusing to change actually worked long-term. The contradiction in the Beetle's story is almost unbelievable. A car designed for Hitler became a symbol of love and peace. A military vehicle became a hippie icon. Nazi engineering became the people's car in the truest sense. Those dark beginnings were completely forgotten, or at least completely overshadowed by what the car became. Maybe it's the most complete transformation in history, or maybe it just proves that things are ultimately what we make them, not what they were designed to be. The Beetle's story covers nearly 100 years, from Hitler's plans to European roads after the war to American hippies to Mexican taxis to modern attempts to bring it back. Over 70 years of actually making them. The cultural impact was way bigger than just sales. Numbers. What makes the Beetle's story remarkable isn't just that it was successful. It's about how something can completely transform what it means. How the same design can serve opposite purposes. How refusing to change works perfectly until it doesn't. How you can't bring back magic through nostalgia alone when that magic was based on substance. The Beetle might be the last car that succeeded by staying exactly the same decade after decade, in a world that demands constant change that made it special. When the world changed too much for that to work anymore, it killed the Beetle. Some things are perfect for their specific moment, and maybe they should end when that moment ends, rather than continuing as weak versions of what they were. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this kind of content, please comment, like, and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And as ever, I really do look forward to seeing you all in the next one.